It's now time for the Eld Henderson Real News Show, Organize, Don't Criticize, which airs each Wednesday evening from 6 o'clock p.m. until 7 o'clock p.m. here on WMPR. We now take you to Studio B for the Eld Henderson Real News Show, Organize, Don't Criticize with Dr. Henderson.
Hello, everybody. This is the Eld Henderson's Real News Show, Organize, Don't Criticize. I want to tell you, folks, I want you to buy my book by the same title, Organize, Don't Criticize, at Amazon.com. You need to learn how to pool your resources, build coalitions, and promote unity with self, family, and community. Your life will change in 30, 60, or 90 days, guaranteed. Organize, Don't Criticize, Amazon.com. That's the book of the century. Buy it today. Okay, thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Eldridge Henderson from Bolton, Mississippi. As usually, I'm here to tell you what you need to do in order to be saved while you're alive. I have been telling you for 50 years now that if you want to determine your destiny from birth to death, you must start young, and you must look at yourself first, your family second, and your community third. That's what we are talking about today. Now, last week, I did part 2 of the Black Church and its survival through 2060. Now, today I'm going to do the final section. We call this part 3. And I'm just going to give you some ideas that most of you all are not doing in your churches anywhere in America, other than about 1% of the pastors and church members throughout this country. And I want you to believe what I tell you and then do something about it and use the strategies and designs that I'm going to share with you. And you will see that things are changing in Mississippi, in the South, in the nation, and the world for Black church leaders. If you don't do what you are hearing from some of the greatest minds in America, and I'm talking about the church specialists, preachers, deacons, bishops, popes, and others that are around making policies and so forth and getting rich and doing the things that you all envy at other churches, and I'm talking about those that have their memberships from 10 to about 150. A lot of you are jealous. But I will tell you this evening one more time what the Black church member can do economically, educationally, and politically to revitalize the Black church by 2060. Now that's a major task, folks. But it's so easily done if you just take notes, record what you hear today. In the next year or two, your church will be growing so fast. You have so much political power, so much economic power in your community until you would think you are what we call a church powerhouse, and you will be. But if you want to revitalize your church economically and politically, folks, you must continue to believe that this is not about survival. It's about liberation, sustainability, and power. Don't you want to have some power in your church? Don't you want people to come and visit you? Don't you want to see the politicians in your church and the corporate leaders other than when they're running for office or they want something from you? Of course you do. So pay attention, and you will find that by 2060, the Black church must function as a wealth-building institution. If your church is not making money to spend for itself, for the membership, and to build things in the community, it's not worth being in business. Now, that is hard to say, ladies and gentlemen. And some of you probably say I shouldn't say it, but that's what you want to hear on this show. You want the real news. You want to talk about and hear someone say over and over, you need to organize. That's why you don't hear me criticizing. I'm going to teach you about organizing and how to build wealth, how to provide a civic training ground at your church, and how to have a pipeline for leadership across generations. Whatever you do in your church, ladies and gentlemen, and I want these preachers and the boards to remember this, if it's only about you and your family, church leaders, if you're not thinking at least 200 or 300 years ahead of where you are today, you need to think about resigning on Monday. Keep in mind, by 2060, the Black church must function as a wealth-building institution, a civic training ground, and a pipeline for leadership across generations. And I want you all to remember, if you want your church to be aggressive and able to sustain itself, leaders in the church, you must do something that most of you don't do. You must get your young members, starting age 10, to do three things. First, starting at age 10, you're going to have to start training your young men and women. Your training will be to get them in a position where they learn to teach others their age and a little older. And then when they get around 10 years of age, you must seriously consider letting them serve in leadership positions and on boards and church committees, even though they're just at 10 years of age. They are there to learn because they will remember and they will do the things they learn and do it better than you because they will have the new skills about time they are 15 or 16. Because you must remember, if you don't change, you're going to die. We have talked about this too long and too often. You get away from leadership when they are young, they will leave you. You've heard me say it, and you look at your own church. 30 years ago, some of you church leaders now are saying, I had young people in my church. They were active 30 years ago, 10 years ago, and now I very see one. Don't see many young people at all. So if you want your church to become what I call economically relevant, you got to think about what the members can do first. And the members will help you shift from what we call short-term aid to long-term wealth. When you start talking about short-term aid, we're talking about financial aid, where you tell your members we need $2,000 to fix the air conditioning. The roof is leaking. Insurance is not going to pay it. We just got a $100,000 bill check from the insurance 2 weeks ago. They're not going to give us any more money. We need $15,000. But if you learn to shift from short-term economics to long-term wealth generation, you will find you will have money saved to take care of emergencies. Most churches don't do this. So you must keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm talking specifically to church leaders now, you must start thinking about that old historical model that the church folks always said, we're just going to help these people get by. We're going to give them a little money now to help them do this or that. But I want you all to consider, ladies and gentlemen, you got to get rid of that old historical model helping people get by. You got to help your members learn to get ahead by planning, by saving, by building, and training those young folks. Anytime a member in your church is 65 or older, he or she should still be on the board of control, should be head of the agency at church, but they ought to be serving only as an advisor to someone younger. And some will say, well, my pastor is 75, 85, 90. That is fine. He or she can still be the pastor. But there is no need to have a pastor over 70 years of age preaching 3 and 4 times a week. They should have younger people doing some of that work. They should have what we learned in economics years ago, something called division of labor, where the senior pastor is not dominating every meeting. He delegates to some of the younger pastors and even to some of those young deacons that have more experience and training than he or she does in specific areas. That's who you allow to make a presentation during your service, during the main service. You don't have to call it a sermon. Allow him or her to talk about economic development, educational strategies for the church during the regular church service. If you don't want to call it a sermon, call it a presentation or a speech, anything you want. So older leaders in the church, learn to gradually step back and get those young people from age 10 up to 60 involved in what you're doing. And this will get you ready to become economically revived. And you also want to find that when you start talking about economic power in your church, this will allow your church folks to fund its own ministries. When you have leaders that are trained, don't think just because they are a church member, they ought to do everything free. Most pastors make a little money. So if you have a person that is trained, you all have sent him or her to training institutions. They have certified to talk about financial literacy and other things. You ought to pay that person $40 or $50 per presentation. They have families too. They have things they need to pay for. They are probably in school somewhere. Don't look for your members, preachers, and boards of control to do everything free. Because if you have economic power, this will allow the church to fund its own ministries, and it'll protect its property, and it'll influence public policy without being dependent on others. And you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about in a few minutes, about economic power that allow the church to do some things that are different. And the way you start this, folks, is start young with those people, talking about intergenerational financial literacy. That's when you get all your young people involved from age 5 to 60, involved in what we call beginning financial literacy education. Some of the research says you ought to start them off about 10 years of age. I say you ought to start them off about 5 or even younger if they can read. Why wait until they're 10 if they can read? You just teach it to them on their level, on the 3rd grade level or on the 5th grade level. And when you start teaching these church members young about financial literacy, if we call it in some areas financial education, you ought to start simple with simple topics as budgeting, tell them what it is, and talk about saving. Saying if you make some money, you need to decide how much you're going to save and how much you're going to spend. Then give that young person an example. Show him how money looks at age 5, what it can purchase, how much to save. And then the next area you're going to get when they get a little financial security, you're going to talk to them about credit repair and debt management. When and how to spend your money, how to manage your debt, how to buy things you need and think about things you want, but don't do anything about it. You don't spend money on things you need if you can't pay for it cash and have a reserve. And if you have too much money and your mind is too big where you spend more than necessary, you must have somebody in your church that can talk about credit repair or debt management. You have to do it, folks, if you want to do this. Now, this is not a thing that most of you would want to do because it's hard work. It takes planning. You want to just wait and let your church membership fall down to 30 or 40. You ought to be looking for your church to increase its membership. Every 3 months, you ought to be gaining from 10 to 15 or 30 members. If your membership is not increasing, if it's decreasing, every 3 months, people are getting sick, people are dying, people are moving. And if you have a strong, positive membership with the skills that I'm telling you, and you allow them to be trained, and then you allow them to teach, that will generate the word out in the community that your church is doing something. And as members get old and sick, can't attend anymore, when young people finish high school and move to college, others will come in and take their positions. Because people that move into your community want to get into an area where they can learn how to do things. And then you'll find with all that economic independence, your church members then can get some training on home ownership and real estate. Every member in your church should own his or her own home. And if they don't, they ought to own some real estate where they are leasing it or renting it to someone else. Of course, you don't have to own the property just to live in it, but everyone should own some. And if they don't want to live in their own property, they can lease it or rent it to someone. And the next thing you have to teach these membership people in your church, starting at age 10, is that they have to start thinking about estate planning and generational wealth, and teaching those young people how to save that property that they own by creating wills and life estates. Every child age 10 should know that he has a will with his mother or father or someone in charge of that will, indicating what his property is worth and what he or she owns. You don't wait until they're 18 to get a will, to have a life estate. There are a lot of young people throughout the world are millionaires, and they have wills and estate plans, and their parents can't even touch it. That's legal, folks, and it can be done. So you want to learn something else that I've been telling you about for many years, and that we found through research, that you ought to have something called, and put emphasis on this, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be surprised, this old concept is called kitchen table economics, where you get your grandparents together with your parents. And you say, Mom, here you are 75 years of age. You all own 250 acres of land. Neither one of you all finished the 6th grade. And here I am, I have 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and I don't even own my car. Do you see that nice car out there in the parkway? I'm still paying on it. It costs $60,000 and I owe $30,000, and you don't have any bills at all. Your land been paid for 30 years. So you're going to sit there and talk to your parents and your grandparents and get what I call this kitchen table economics, and let them tell you something for a change. And they're going to talk to you about working hard, saving, getting that training they need to get a good job where they were working as a factory specialist, doing landscaping, doing air conditioning, plumbing, and so forth. They didn't have no certification, but they were so good, they would be called constantly to do work after they left that factory job. making more money on weekends and after work than they made on that real job. And that's where they bought that house and paid for that car and that land that you want them to will to you. And they shouldn't will you anything if you're not doing better than they are with all that education you have. Now, that is hard to say for some, but it's not hard for me to say. If you have parents and they have worked hard all their lives and have resources, everything is paid for, and they are 60, 70, 75 or whatever, after they have raised you and helped you raise your kids, they should take you out of the wheel if you're doing worse than they are. Most of you are probably getting ready now to turn that radio off. If you do, that's fine. But I'm telling you now, you can listen to your parents and get this kitchen table economics and learn something. And this will prevent wealth lost due to lack of knowledge or lack of stewardship. If you don't know how to manage folks, no matter what you have, it's not going to generate what we call capital power. You will never have that community capital power, and you will never have anything to pool. You can't pool your resources if you don't have any. And that's what your parents used to do, and that's what they were involved in. 30 and 40 years ago, during the so-called segregation, when you couldn't go and get insurance other than at a black insurance company, you most certainly couldn't go to the bank and get a home loan, and on and on and on. But a lot of the parents pool their resources through their church, through mutual aid societies and so forth. We're going to get into that later on. And they were able to do some things. We call this black tradition, where they found ways to make things happen other than getting in debt all the time. Setting goals, buying things, paying for things, and not always paying the lowest amount every month. And the property or the debt increases every time. And time they have a real emergency, they lose everything possible. Now, there are some practical things you can learn through your church, ladies and gentlemen, that can eliminate this problem. There's something called family and church-based investment circle that you can set up in your church, starting next week. Small groups of 5 get together and say, we're going to invest in something, real estate. We're going to invest so much money a month, and we're going to start a convenience store at the church. We're going to sell wigs. We're going to set up a fingernail and toenail shop in this church basement. We're going to start a small manufacturing company in the church community center, on and on and on. And we're going to set up what we call a cooperative business where we can all pool our resources, buy the products, build the products, and then sell the goods to church members first, community members second, and then open it up to the residents throughout the area. Folks, this sounds like it's just too much work. But your grandparents did it. Their parents did it. So the benefit, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. When you start saving and investing and training your young folks, starting in the church, you then will have the benefit of community financing, where you make something, sell something, and you sell it to the members of the church first, the community residents second, and anybody else third. And you will always have that income revolving around and turning over and over. You can make the preacher happy by increasing his salary. You got a $50,000 account coming in there every 6 or 7 months, putting that money in the bank. You might want to give him a little extra, $2,000 or $3,000 a year, and let him work less, and encourage him to delegate more. And if you tell him that's why you're giving him $3,000 or $4,000 extra per year for him to rest and delegate more, you'll be helping yourself in the long run. That pastor will then end up being a counselor, an advisor, or a go-to person to give good advice, and he will be working less, his health will get better, and he will have less and less responsibility, and the membership will start increasing because he will have people that actually know what they are doing and not going on what the Lord said. Now, I'm not going to get into that. That makes a lot of people angry. But I'm going to tell you, folks, if you listen to this simple information that I'm sharing today, you will find that you already have, and this is specifically for preachers and boards of control at this church, you already have the talent already in your church and in your pews. You have to leverage that talent. Now, let me tell you what your members have expertise in, preachers and boards of control in these churches. You have members that are experts in business, finance, accounting, law, real estate, insurance, and anything else you come up with. Most of the leaders in the community that are Black are members of some church. Many don't go every Sunday, but many have membership, and they're going to show up at least once a month and on most major days. And many of them have the resources to pay their tithes. And a lot of people don't care whether they come to church or not if they pay their tithes. But those kind of folks are basically the ones that's going to be on these committees and boards and making decisions, even though you're not going to see them at church at all. They know the information. They have the skills. And when you know anything, you're going to find that your church is going to be considered a business and not just some house where people show up to have a good time and see who is wearing the best hat, the best suit, and the latest fashion, so they can go home after they leave the eating place and talk about Sister Mary and Uncle John and what the preacher said. Most of you don't remember what he said because he said the same thing last Sunday and you didn't remember that. So when you get new leadership and new ideas and new strategies, you find that you are going to start preserving and creating new things in your church where you will have the funds and the talent and the ability to create capital improvement. You have what we call financial sustainability. And then when you get your church improved, have your finances saved, then you can set up what we call an endowment for your building to continuously be expanded, have money set aside for scholarships, and say every member in this church that's finished middle school, high school, or college, we're going to give them a performance scholarship. We're going to show them and help them. Since they have learned leadership skills, we see here that this young secretary has some excellent accounting skills. This young man that we start training at age 10 is one of the greatest presenters I've seen. And this young girl over here has been singing in the choir for 5 years. She's only 10 years of age, and she's doing solos. Those are the people that you're going to identify and give them a scholarship. So when they leave that church, when they finish high school, they won't have to go anywhere and get a student loan. I'm teaching to you now, folks. I'm telling you some things. And if you look around, all of you have members in your church that's able and capable enough to do these things. We have a break coming up soon. And I want you all to know in the next 35 seconds, that break will be upon us. And we're going to show you and tell you again how you can create something in your church and engage your people in what we call workforce development. I'm going to tell you how you can do this. You don't need to send your people to college and trade school and all that stuff in the current times. 2026 and beyond through 2060. If you don't choose to do so, some would prefer it, others won't. So we have about 30 seconds, folks. When you come back, I'm going to talk about workforce engagement. I'm going to tell you about civic education in the church, how to become involved in local politics. And if your church is not involved in local politics, that's a sin, ladies and gentlemen. The mayor is a member of your church. You ought to be telling him or her what to do. The supervisors are members of your church, county supervisors, the judges and all. You ought to be working with them and telling them what to do and help them do it. And I will be sharing this with you when we come back.
Plan today, protect tomorrow. Life is full of uncertainties, but your family's future doesn't have to be. Having life insurance, a will, and a trust in place is one of the most powerful acts of love and responsibility you can give to your loved ones. Life insurance provides financial security for your family when they need it most. Will ensures your wishes are honored and your assets go where you intend. Trust offers added protection and peace of mind by safeguarding your legacy. Don't wait until it's too late. Start preparing today so your family is protected tomorrow. Need guidance? Contact Dr. Eldridge Henderson at 601-201-11957 to learn more about how to get started. Dr. Henderson is available for speaking engagements. Like and follow us on Facebook and YouTube. Now back to our show.
When was the last time you reviewed your church's bylaws? Are they current with today's laws and regulations, or are they putting your ministry at risk? At PCAP Media, we help churches review, update, and strengthen their bylaws to stay compliant and protected. Don't wait for a problem to arise. Be proactive and prepared. For more information, call PCAP Media today at 601-201-1957. We are also available to help you with your 501c3 application. PCAP Media, supporting today's church with tomorrow in mind.
Okay, folks, we're back after the break, and I'm just briefly and slowly telling you and showing you that your church, in most parts of America, your church is dying because of several reasons. One, your membership is being diminished, getting smaller and smaller. You're not using the few members you have, you're not using their skills. You're keeping the same leadership too long. They are getting old and sick and losing the ability to think clearly. And you all just keep them up there running things instead of encouraging them by giving them a little more money and let them semi-retire and delegate to someone else that's working and already have the skills. And believe it or not, those young deacons and young preachers that just got out of the seminary, many of those have big time paying jobs, and they will work for probably $5,000 a year, and you're already paying the preachers $65,000 or $70,000, and you get newer and better updated information from that young preacher that's going to be assisting. Think about it, folks. Think about it. So now let's look at this, what we call workforce re-engagement through your church. I've been telling you for years that if you want to rebuild economic stability in your church, you have to start thinking about the things you need in your community and in your home. What do you need in your home? You need people that have skills and certifications in all kind of areas. I'm not going to mention them. But you need people that can do apprenticeships, and you need people that can do entrepreneurial coaching, teaching people how to make money, how to start businesses. You don't have to send your church members to college and trade school to learn those skills. You can do that right at your church in that family life center that you're not using. Those same people that teaching trade certifications, teaching apprenticeship deals, teaching these courses in business can come to your church and do the same teaching to your members and have them to the point in 1 or 2 months some less, some more, where they can go to that school down the road a little piece and take that test in air conditioning to get that certification, in plumbing, in auto mechanics, and other, in tax preparation, in financial literacy, in drug counseling, and so forth, because they have learned it in the church from those specialists that I told you that you already have in your church. Folks, you don't have to sit in a classroom 4 or 5 years to learn anything anymore. Most certifications are obtained through learning somewhere and then going and taking a test and passing it. That's the new thing. That's what you need to use your church for. So you have to look at the people you have in your church, pastors and boards of control, and re-engage these folks that have these skills and they have these trades and they have what we call ownership of these areas, and they could teach it to your church members. Folks, think about it. So we have the people we need with the skills, and the outcome is you're going to have more church members. You're going to have stronger families in your church. Your church is going to be stronger. And when you have stronger families in your church, and your church is building and expanding, you're definitely going to have stronger communities. And with businesses and trades and certification, you can make more money, keep it in the community. And when you do anything, you will be getting highlighted on television, on radio. They will start saying you are actually doing something because the church member at Church X bought 10 properties around their church and didn't even have to get a grant anywhere to rehab these properties. And they rehab those houses and small businesses and vacant churches and sold them to their members first, if they wanted it, community people second, or people out in the greater area. That's your job, ladies and gentlemen. You shouldn't have a church in the middle of a war zone. Everything else around you is burned down, torn down, or falling down. And you're just looking at it, calling the mayor's office, calling the county supervisors, calling the water department, calling the electrical owners of the electrical facilities and say, we need your help. You're not going to get very much help from those kind of folks. If you're not doing what you're supposed to do, since they are members of your church in the first place, in most instances, you got to get them involved. And when you have a problem, all you have to do is pick up that phone and say, Deacon Charlie, you over the water department. You over the contracts in this city or in this county. And these are our problems. We've been working on them for a long time. Just one phone call, and they'll send somebody to take care of that. Now, we call this political and civic revitalization, ladies and gentlemen. And members can do is amazing when they get involved in politics and civic responsibility in the church. And I'm going to tell you one thing that you got to consider. You're saying the most important thing in the church is to expect your members to be voters. That is not the most important thing you need to teach your members to do when you start talking about political and civic responsibility and civic revitalization, folks. Voting is essential, but it's not sufficient. You got to do more than that. The real power in the church is when you get your people involved in year-round local governance in your civic institutions. And this is very simple. You're going to get your trained church members to serve on local boards and committees, that your church leaders who are politicians, mayors, board members, agency heads, and other, you're going to get your members that you have trained starting from age 5 or 10, and they are going to do some things that will amaze you. They're going to get in positions of responsibility, not in elected or appointed positions. You're going to include your members into what we call your volunteer team, and tell your sharpest member in education that the superintendent, who is the member of this church, is going to recommend you to the mayor, who appoints the next board member, and you're going to be on the school board. So you're going to shape the curriculum and help our youth generate better scores and have certifications and learn some skills, and they won't have to go and get a student loan for 4 or 5 years and learn nothing but how to be in debt. You're going to tell that other young person that's been working in your church that you have trained, say, now you're 19 years of age, and say, we have a position on the zoning board. Have another young person been trained? He's 19 and a half. Say, the planning board, the zoning board have these positions, and I'm going to tell our deacon, who is over the zoning in Hinds County or Wilkerson County, or wherever you are, that he needs to submit your name to serve on this zoning and planning board. You're just 19. You're a volunteer. You're not going to even get paid, but you're learning while you're young. And then that young person that's been serving as your secretary, the one that's been keeping those books, you're going to tell him or her that there are some openings on the budget committee in the county, in the city, in the state. So we need some volunteers to work on the budget and the advisory committee. And these are very, very important positions. The most important civic position in any government, local, state, or federal, and don't ever forget this, ladies and gentlemen, are those people that are running these boards and commissions and agencies, and many of them are volunteers. And it's important because they first know where their money is, where it's coming from, how much you have to spend, and then they can help the people that's getting paid to be the board chairman, or the person that managed the board that's actually getting a salary, being the board chairman for zoning, planning, on the school board or whatever. They know they got $450,000 for education and training, and that smart person is going to get your church $200,000 or $300,000 to put in the church's training program and train more young people how to become certified in various areas. So it's better and cheaper to train your members to serve on these boards of control as volunteer members. And after they do work for 5 or 6 years, you got them on the board at 18, 19, 20. But by the time they're 25 or 30, they then could run for the mayor position, run for a position in the legislature. They can be a coroner. They can be a supervisor at 22. They can be a sheriff at 25. On and on and on. You don't have to wait to be old to get something like this. You start off and you do 20, 25 years and you retire by the time you're 35 to 45 or 50, and you got another good 40 years to continue to do side hustles, stay in your church, and make a difference. So I'm going to tell you folks, now these roles that I just mentioned in these churches, they have what we call low visibility, but they have some of the highest and most important decision-making power than the person that's elected or appointed to those positions of responsibility. The one that knows where the money comes from, knows the guidelines as to where it should be allocated, and got a system already in place, they can channel that money through and around a politician to areas where there's an area of need. Because if you allow the politician to decide where that $450,000 going, that you get in your community for housing or for the police or whatever might not ever get there. He or she going to appoint one of their friends to manage this money, or give their friends a contract for $200,000 or $300,000, and they're going to pay the friend $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to manage the grant. They're not going to have an application filled out properly. They're not going to have a duration date. They're not going to have any audits in the contract. And every month, that friend that's supposed to be providing job opportunities, they're supposed to be putting out computers in this city so they can watch for where the dumping is happening. Not going to ever do that, but they're getting paid for it. And this happens all over the country. So get in one of these positions that has this low visibility, but carries this high decision-making power by being a volunteer, getting that training you need in your church. And then you can be politically accountable through your church. And your church will get to the point, ladies and gentlemen, where your church will be acting as the community standard bearer, where your members will serve as the hub of information, and they can generate the things you need in your community. And when you know anything, you are in charge of the town hall meetings. You are being invited to make policy. The mayor has a $2 million budget, but he's received $4 million from the state or for the federal government. And all mayors, all county supervisors are more than just a politician. Many of them have skills, but it's not skills in politics. Some don't know anything about management. Some don't know anything about payroll. They never had a business. They don't know anything about paying nobody. But John Doe does, that's in the church, that's been managing jobs in the private sector for years. And the pastor, a lot of them have major responsibilities before they retire. But many of them don't get involved themselves in these committees through their church deacons that's running things in government. They don't have anything on the agenda to reflect church member building versus not doing anything. They just say, we're going to meet every Sunday. I'm going to preach to you and tell you how to love your enemies and die and go to heaven after you've been sick for 2 or 3 years. That's another thing I shouldn't say, but I'm telling you because I've seen it happen over and over. So members of the church, the pastors, and the people that are trained to manage the church funds and programs and policy must set up an agenda, folks, where you can be a reflector of current community needs. And you get this through this training, through this civic education that you get. And then your church can serve as a classroom and have the civic lessons taught right there. Something you're not going to get in the public school. So if you don't teach your young people how to be engaged in politics and governance while they're in the church, they will never learn it in high school. And they're not going to learn very much in college about politics, about management. They won't learn anything in school about what we call state constitutional amendments. They don't learn very little, if anything, about federal and state budgets and how that impacts individual communities starting on the local level. But you can teach all of this in the church. And the end result, ladies and gentlemen, if you do the simple things that I mentioned today, your members in your church will be able, because you taught them to vote, you taught them to advocate for policy development, and you taught them to organize from an informed position where they know exactly how to do things. And then you have taught them to go and get on these commissions and boards of control and do some things. that's going to help you have a better church, a better community. Because when you have a better church and a better community, you'll find that the banks, the big grocery stores, and others will come back to your community. They are leaving you now because you didn't do anything. You let your community fall apart because you kept the same pastor there for 40 years. Now, there's nothing wrong with a pastor serving for 40 years, or a deacon on the deacon board for 50 years, or a mother of the church sitting up in there for 70 years, unless they have training somebody to take some of their responsibilities before they step down. It's hard to hear, folks, but you got to start these members off early. Teach them how important it is to vote, how important it is to advocate, and how important it is for them to organize, starting when they're about age 5 or 10, and when they get 18 or 19, they ought to be in major positions where they're making decisions on how to spend that money. We call it that tax money. And the tax money, ladies and gentlemen, that's your money. All government agencies spend your money, not theirs. When they need something, they need a new bomb, a new airplane, or a new highway, or a new housing unit, they're going to get the funds from you. They're going to increase your taxes. Or they're just going to build what they want and assign and increase to your taxes. And you're going to pay it. Now, some of you have the money to go and file a suit against them, but you're not going to win in most cases because you don't have the training to know how to win. I call that criticizing the government because your ability not to understand how to make things happen. Now let's look at generational roles. Now I'm going to start now at age 6 through age 60. And you're going to have to learn, preachers and leaders of the church, if you wait until your membership is 50 and 60 before you start giving them responsibility, you're going to die as a church. I guarantee you. You don't have any programs for your young people. You don't have any program for your people 25 to 30. Nothing going on for those 30 to 35, other than being a chairman of the play committee or something simple as that. But you got to build this young skill base so these young people can get on what I call that staircase, starting at the bottom of the ladder and gradually working themselves up. And when they get to be 30 or 40, they'll be what we call leaders, generational leaders. And they will already have that wealth of knowledge that they acquired from those elders that's not working hard in the church, but sitting there advising. You've heard it, where God told some of the leaders in the church to sit down now, rest a little bit, get you some committees together, and you let them handle things. And of course, you want to still be important, and you just handle the big issues and let them handle the day-to-day stuff. So some of you pastors that's 65 or older, that's what you got to do. Share your knowledge with the youth in your church and do a little reading yourself and find out where the problems are and how to delegate and give somebody in your church the ability to solve them versus laying around all the time, moaning and groaning, getting a bad heart or having a lot of stress, trying to figure out how you're going to pay your bill. The insurance lapsed on your church and nobody told you. The van can't work anymore. Your bus won't operate because someone didn't do proper maintenance on it. You didn't have the church mechanic on the transportation committee in your church because he was from the wrong family. But if you had him on your church transportation committee, he would have fixed that van or that bus, and he would have fixed it without charging the church anything. So, folks, I want to tell you, when you get your young members trained, after they turn to the age where they can really use their skills, that's when you can say, young man, you are 23 years of age. It's time for you to stop volunteering now. We're going to run you for office. Our church has 1,800 members, and you are going to be a local supervisor. And we have enough members already registered to vote, because we've been teaching people how to register starting when they were 17. So as soon as they turn 18, they go down and register. And every one of our young people are registered voters. And you could win without a runoff. And all you got to do is talk about all those years you volunteered to do this and that. And folks, you have built then a social impact leader through your church that has all the knowledge and skills necessary where he can make policy. He knows about social justice. He is aware politically how to make things happen. He knows how to organize conferences and training sessions. He knows how to build partnerships. And that young person just turned 18 or 19 because you started him when he was 5 or 10 years of age in that church doing things. And by the time that young person is 35 to 60, you have made an economic expert out of him. He is a seasoned politician that started through volunteering. And now he's a major contributor to your church. And you started him off when he or she was 5 years of age. And now your church is so strong. People are calling on you to come from your church and give us a speech and tell us how your church is moving and how it moved so much in the last 10 years when your membership had diminished to 50 and now you have 1,500. Folks, it's simple to make things happen if you have a plan. But if you don't teach anything, you're not going to get anything. But hardship, stress. Your people are going to be going to the doctor every week. Every time you have a church call, you want to see the mother, the deacon, the trustee. He or she not sitting in that corner. Where is Mother Mary? Where is Deacon Brown? Are they down at the Veterans Administration Hospital? They at CMC, they are somewhere. They just had a stroke the other day. Stroke because of stress, tension, money problems. All that can give you a stroke, folks. If you have big bills coming in, you done had an accident in your car, your insurance has lapsed, your child is in school somewhere, he done got locked up because you didn't train him how to stay away from drugs and robbing and things of that nature. And there you are, sick and gone. So, folks, I want to tell you that if you are in a position where you want to start changing your life and determine your destiny from birth to death, you have to start to do something different, something simple like training. You have to use that old model that I learned years ago. It's about 7 stages in that model. The first thing you have to do, ladies and gentlemen, is, and we got 30 seconds, you have to listen to people. When you listen to someone, you got to then start thinking. What did they say? I done told you this before. When you listen and think, then you decide, well, it's time for me to learn something. When you learn something, ladies and gentlemen, you say, I've learned so much now, I know how to make some money. So when you learn, that means you're going to earn something. And after you earn and make all that money, all your bills are paid. So then you're going to save some of it. And when you start saving, you're going to have your insurance taken care of. You buy your house, you're going to pay for it 5 years early, pay for your car cash. And now my closing remark is, if you want to be saved on earth and learn how to live in heaven while you're alive, and learn to do some things that are going to help self, family, and community, you can live in heaven on earth, die in your sleep, folks, and go on to heaven and say, thank you, Lord. I heard some good news.